Hello there. Prime Minister Liz Truss decrees a radically liberal economic policy for Great Britain. Taxes down, banker bonuses up. But without growth, there is a risk of a high debt. A new economic model has found its way into Great Britain, the so-called Trussonomics. On Friday, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, presented a radically new economic concept with massive tax cuts and deregulation for what he called a new era. The program should lead the country out of the vicious circle of persistent stagnation and into a cycle of growth and prosperity. The term Trussonomics refers to the economics ideology of the new Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer. For the last 20 years, politics has always revolved around redistribution. That's how Truss defended her program after the election as Prime Minister. That didn't bring us any growth. Her government is pursuing a different path, primarily tax cuts to create investment and growth. If that doesn't make me popular, so be it, Truss said. After years of weak economic development, her government is aiming for growth of 2.5%. Now it's about three things in the economy: reforms on the supply side of the economy, responsible fiscal policy, and low taxes to make the country competitive again. That's what Kwarteng said when he announced the highest tax cuts in a supplementary budget on Friday since Margaret Thatcher's time. He wants to abolish the top tax rate of 45%, lower the base rate of income tax to 19%, and completely remove the cap on bonus payments in the London financial district. He's discussing all of this closely with the governor of the Bank of England, whom he meets twice a week, Kwarteng said. The admission should also be understood to mean that the government wants to make the central bank more responsible in the future in order to pursue a policy that is more geared towards growth. The opposition criticized that the program was a continuation of the failed economic policies of the conservative governments of the past 12 years. It is a program for the rich and irresponsible at a time when ordinary people are fighting for real wages and do not know how to pay their bills. The Institute for Fiscal Studies warned this week that the government's tax cuts, coupled with heavy spending on energy aid, are raising the government's debt and the debt servicing levels to unsustainable levels. The Bank of England warned that the program would have an inflationary effect. Meanwhile, Truss and Kwarteng argue that the tax cuts and planned deregulation of the economy will ensure economic growth that is so strong that the debt service will be easier for the then stronger economy to bear. Truss co-authored the book Britannia Unchained with Conservative MPs in 2012. In it, they advocate a radically free market economy, deregulation, low taxes, and lower social spending. The economy should be controlled with a view to economic growth. Chancellor of the Exchequer Kwarteng was a co-author of the book. Truss and several ministers in the new government are members of neoliberal institutions such as the Free Enterprise Group and the radical pro-Brexit faction, the European Research Group or ERG. They work closely with the right-wing Conservative Institute of Economic Affairs and the Legatum Institute. According to The Guardian, both belong to the Atlas Group, a network of US and British right-wing think tanks. US President Joe Biden tweeted during Truss' visit to New York, of all places, that he did not believe in the so-called trickle-down policy, but without referring specifically to the British Prime Minister. The term comes from the theory that tax cuts and more disposable cash in companies and higher earners led to spending, and with that in investments and jobs from which the socially disadvantaged in society would also benefit. But what exactly is the government in London up to now? Arguably, the most important are the tax cuts to spur investment in Britain, which has been weak for years. The Johnson government's 1.25% increase in social security contributions, the proceeds of which were to go to the NHS Health Service and later to the nursing service, will be reversed. Chancellor Kwarteng also announced that the planned increase in corporate income tax from 19 to 25% will not take place. Both measures mean the government will be left with £30 billion less in the coffers. The British top income tax rate of 45% will be abolished, and the base tax rate will be reduced from 20 to 19% from 2023. The stamp duty that a buyer has to pay when purchasing a property is also reduced, which should help the buyers and thus the property market. Above all, investors who are buying a house for the first time will be relieved. They don't have to pay stamp duty at all for smaller properties. The criticism, however, is that the real estate market has been overheated for a long time anyway, and that will only get worse then. The City of London is set to experience a second Big Bang, as they put it, a wave of deregulation to make the city the largest and most competitive financial center in the world, as Truss put it during her visit to New York. The limit introduced in 2014 after the financial crisis, according to which a bonus may not exceed twice the annual salary, will be abolished. Kwarteng said capping bonuses only resulted in bankers being paid out of the country or relocating. That will change now. In the near future, capital regulations for the insurance sector are also to be relaxed in order to free up more capital for investments in infrastructure. In addition to citizens, companies should now also be helped so that they can bear the energy costs this winter. This program will cost £60 billion over the next 6 months, according to Kwarteng. In total, all energy payment aid for citizens and businesses amounts up to £140 billion. It is the largest aid program in Europe. After the government announced immediately after Truss took office that it would freeze gas and electricity prices at current level, the new Economy Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg announced that there will be aid for the economy on Thursday. According to this, the cost that companies have to bear for electricity and gas will be practically halved over the next 6 months compared to the forecast price increase, not to the current ones. The economy has praised this as extremely helpful, but also expects further help after the 6 months. In social matters, the motto demand and encourage should now be used more strongly. Social assistance, the so-called universal credit, is to be restricted for more recipients than before if they are not willing to look more intensively for work. The high number of vacancies and people who do not take part in working life impedes economic growth, said Kwarteng. In addition, the possibility of going on strike will be restricted by law in the future, so that strikes may only be held if wage negotiations have demonstrably failed. And numerous regulations, such as lengthy consultations that hinder investments, for example, when building new houses in the outskirts of cities or in infrastructure projects, are to be dropped. The moratorium that has blocked gas fracking in Great Britain since 2019 is to be eased significantly so that the country can benefit more from its own gas. But there is a problem. The rock formations in Great Britain are not very suitable for fracking, so gas production will not be able to play anywhere near the role it has in the United States, for example. Truss also wants to promote international trade. The idea of free ports planned by the Johnson government is to be implemented in the form of much larger economic zones. In these zones, there will be massively more favorable tax regulations for companies. No stamp duty will have to be paid for the purchase of real estate, and companies will not have to pay social security contributions for cheap labor. Critics fear that this could be a foretaste of so-called charter cities in which capitalism reigns supreme, and in the long run, protective regulations such as the 48-hour week and environmental regulations could even be circumvented. The government is planning 40 of these new economic zones. The concept of Truss is a gamble game. But what happens if there is no economic growth? According to the Bank of England, the massive aid program in the energy sector means that, contrary to expectations, inflation will not rise above 11%, But uncertainty in international financial markets over Britain's higher debt is being cited as the reason the pound's exchange rate has fallen to very low levels against both the euro and the dollar. The new government is taking a big risk with its new program. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.